everyone. I warmly welcome you all to this webinar organized by the Faculty of Education of the Open University of Sri Lanka on the topic Open Educational Resources in the Context of Generative Artificial Intelligence. I am very pleased to introduce to you the presenter today, Dr. Surita Jangiani. Dr. Surita Jangiani is an Associate Professor of Teaching in the Department of Educational Counseling and Psychology and Special Education in the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia, Canada. She also holds the David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education in that university. And in this role, she seeks to leverage open educational principles to advance critical multicultural education. Her current work focuses on open pedagogy, alternative grading practices, and fostering a sense of belonging in teaching and learning contexts. Dr. Jangiani's teaching expertise includes areas related to critical digital pedagogy, social emotional learning, and mental health, and teaching and learning. We are very happy that she is here today with us at the Open University of Sri Lanka. She is a visiting scholar staying with us these days, and we've had very productive sessions with her in relation to open educational resources. So we are thankful to her for kindly accepting our invitation to do this webinar today on this very timely topic. I think important for all of us to discuss upon. So I would like to request all the participants, physical as well as Zoom participants, to, if you have any questions, please, Zoom participants, please post them on the chat box, and physical participants can ask them orally at the end of her presentation. Thank you very much once again for your participation, and I would like to invite Dr. Surita now to start her presentation. Dr. Surita.
Thank the Open University of Sri Lanka, Faculty of Education, and Dr. Shiranika for inviting me to be here today. I took a look at the webinar for this series. There are some very impressive webinars that have taken place already in relation to generative AI in higher education and teacher education. So before I begin, in Canada, we typically do land acknowledgements before we begin, so I'd like to start with one. And the campus that I'm at is the UBC Vancouver Point Grey campus, and it is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And I'd just like to take a moment to unpack this. When we say traditional, we recognize lands traditionally used and are occupied by First Nations. Ancestral recognizes lands that is handed down from generation to generation, and unceded refers to land that was not turned over by the crown to the crown by a treaty or other agreement. So for today's webinar, I'd like to focus on OER in the context of generative AI. So let me take a few moments to step back and situate and contextualize my framing of Gen AI. I want to acknowledge my own tensions with generative AI. What gravitated me towards open educational practices was the opportunity we have to create a world where we see and understand one another as opposed to othering. When we create educational materials that show diverse ways of being and understanding the world, expanding epistemic and social justice, it is a means to foster understanding across contexts, to reduce barriers, and to decrease stigmas. It's about the values associated with open educational practices, access, inclusivity, and equity that drew me to this area. And I feel with all the concerns associated with generative AI at this moment, it's causing me a lot of tensions to think about what gravitated me towards open educational practices and, you know, some of the concerns we have with generative AI. So I want to be transparent about this. You know, I think we've made so many positive strides when it comes to equity, diversity, inclusion, and decolonization. And what I've observed is sometimes with the use of generative AI, how that work can be at risk. EDID impacts people's well-being, ability to thrive. When we talk about democratizing education, this matters. I also want to acknowledge that there are many ways that generative AI allows us to innovate. I've seen many ways that generative AI is being used, coding, creating resources, materials that are accessible, scalable, and the list carries on. So I can't deny also how, remarkable and useful this tool is. So it's really kind of highlighting the tension for me. And full disclosure, I use it as well. So the area is wrought with a lot of tension. Okay. So an overview for my talk. So I'm going to begin by talking about the constraints of working with generative AI and thinking through how we can use generative AI in ways that can move us forward critically while upholding the values and principles associated with open educational practices. I've listed a few of them on this slide. And what might be emerging and evolving ways to use generative AI alongside the 5 Rs of OER. Generative AI also begs us to ask deeper questions that go beyond how do we use this tool, but what does it mean to create content? Who is creating and who is curating? How is efficiency and ethics being shaped in the process, and so forth? It's not a dichotomous relationship, it's more complex. Generative AI is incorporated into so much of our everyday life. It's a tool, a mediator, it's become intertwined with our day-to-day functioning. Generative AI is bridging our internal and external worlds in new ways that we're watching unfold at the same time that we're questioning how do we use this tool that's changing our landscapes. So I'll begin with a few definitions. So when we talk about open educational resources, we're referring to teaching and learning and research materials in any medium, digital or otherwise, that reside in the public domain or have been released under an open license that permits no-cost use or adaptation and redistribution by others with no or limited restrictions. Okay, one thing you probably heard me talk a lot about is open and the freedoms that come with it, and that refers to the 5 Rs. And I just want to say, open it's not just about being free. It's also about the affordances offered by open, right? Instead of, so referring to the 5 freedoms, which are commonly referred to the 5 Rs. So this is reuse, so the ability to reuse context in a wide range of ways. Revise, the right to adapt and adjust, modify, or alter content. Remix, the right to combine the original revised content with other materials to create something new. Retain, the right to make it your own, control the copies and the content. And redistribute, the right to share copies of the original content, your revisions or your remixes with others. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about the constraints now. So there's so much talk about the importance and the need of a balanced perspective when using generative AI. But I can't help but notice how the use of generative AI is at times making us fall or slip into assumptions, to be less critical. So there seems to be a degree of sort of cognitive offloading occurring at times, perhaps leading to de-skilling. So it's interesting how structures of efficiency can sometimes allow harms to creep in. I also by no means want to downplay that there may be many ways that generative AI is also helping to fulfill needs, accessibility, the ways that students are using it as well. And they're also using this technology to harness new ways of doing things. Some students are using it in ways that preserve metacognition as well, so not just leading to offloading or de-skilling. They're asking generative AI to ask it questions, to think deeply about what they're doing. So again, there's a lot of different ways that this technology is being used. Okay, so what are some of the constraints that we need to keep in mind as we're using generative AI? One are some of the inequities. So one is paywalls. To use some of the more advanced features of generative AI, you need to pay. They're locked behind paywalls. If you pay, you can get access to a better version. You're able to do and create more, perhaps resource-intensive content. You get higher quality outputs. And likely maybe outputs that are more difficult to discern that Gen AI has been used. Also, lack of access to the same tools. So if our learners or students are using it, If some are able to acquire a paid version versus not, you're going to have a difference in how they're being able to access it. Skills, user skill level varies. How are they able to use and interact with the tools will vary, and you potentially have the risk of de-skilling here that was mentioned earlier. The importance of a stable, fast internet connection is often needed to fully utilize these tools. Modern devices, you need some of the latest technology, again, to be able to use this and kind of fully use it to their potential. There's also the digital divide. So how is it that so for some countries, some areas, if you don't have the infrastructure or funding to create or control generative, say, AI companies, technologies themselves, this limits the ability to shape how these tools are developed and used. And we're seeing this happening, and this greatens the digital divide. There's also the potential to displace human workers. We might have generative AI that's starting to grade our work for us, right? So we're offloading that task. There's a lack of human connection that's occurring. So we need to keep all of these in mind and think about how are we using it to avoid kind of falling into these. I also want to highlight this article, Optimize to Open. And this speaks to some of the inequities that I mentioned. So this study is investigating how open large language models can be used to optimize work efficiently in low-resource educational settings, with the goal of improving equitable access to AI-powered learning worldwide. So some interesting findings on different tools and how they can be harnessed in areas where you don't have access to high-speed internet, or that's an issue. And so it's supporting some of the open educational principles of inclusion, sustainability, and transparency. Another issue to consider is intellectual property. So this is another common area of concern, and questions arise about how the data used to train these systems was obtained, and who owns the content produced by these models. These issues raise significant ethical concerns. So use of content to train the models. Many generative AI tools have been trained on copyrighted works, and often without the permission of those copyright holders. This also means that AI-generated content could be subjected to future copyright claims as well, right? So it's a murky area that's unfolding. Also, applying copyright to generated output. Can work created by AI be copyright? Again, gray area, but most jurisdictions, including in Canada, copyright law generally requires human authorship. So the work must be original and reflect human skills and judgment to qualify for protection. So as a result, purely AI-generated content typically cannot be copyrighted. Data privacy and ethics in generative AI. So what happens to the information you input into generative AI models, and where does it go? So we have the issue of data storage and model training. Information input into generative AI models is frequently stored, processed, and used to further train and improve the systems, which raises concerns about how securely that data is handled. Risk to sensitive information. You may inadvertently expose sensitive data. You might, if you're using it for grading, you might publish students' information there, unpublished research perhaps, which risks being stored, and maybe it surfaces in other people's prompts. Ownership and control. So the use of these tools creates significant questions regarding who owns the data provided and whether users maintain control over their proprietary or confidential content. Can you trust your information won't be shared? So later I'll show you some ways we can do some privacy settings, but again, how transparent is it with what's being done at the other end? And that leads into copyright and transparency. So it's really important that we document how generative AI was used in the creation and process to ensure proper attribution and to maintain transparency and address concerns, perhaps about inadvertently including copyrighted or private information. And then surveillance and profiling. So some of the platforms, you may notice if you've used them, track user behavior, prompt histories to personalize interactions. You might get information back that you find, oh, this is really personalized, right? So this is a way that can lead to surveillance and profiling that undermines issues of equity and freedom. Okay, bias in erasure. So generative AI systems may reflect and reproduce biased perspectives, contributing to epistemic inequality and privileging certain ways of knowing over other. So these the language produced by these models can encode and reinforce existing social bias, including perhaps gender inequalities and culturally dominant views. When used in contexts such as grading or feedback, these systems may further entrench dominant views or dominant norms of writing and expression, marginalizing sort of alternative voices, other ways of knowing. So this raises important concerns in relation to frameworks such as universal design for learning, and it challenges whose knowledge is valued and legitimized. So in doing so, generative AI risks reinforcing systemic inequalities, limiting diversity of expression, and undermining efforts to amplify historically marginalized voices. And then, think about Gayatri Spivak's work. There's this ongoing struggle with the subaltern voices to be heard and recognized. And we have to consider how these technologies may constrain rather than support this. Okay, the next issue that we should think about is the collaboration in generative AI. So a few things to take note of as you're using generative AI, especially as we're talking about in relation to open educational resources, is the necessity of subject matter expertise. So one of the limitations of generative AI is its lack of nuanced understanding in some fields, particularly in relation to specialized or complex subject areas. To use these tools effectively for content curation, individuals must already possess a strong understanding in the relevant field. Otherwise, it becomes difficult to identify inaccuracies, hallucinations, which can occur not only in the content itself, but also say if it's generating references. Multidisciplinary oversight. So this is the need for careful oversight for AI-generated material. And I think here a collaborative approach is really essential, involving individuals with diverse expertise, not just subject matter, but also in areas related to accessibility, ethics, and bias. So why it's so important to work as a team. So multiple perspectives are necessary to critically evaluate and refine outputs. Dynamic collaboration. So we know the work is stronger when we work collaboratively. Generative AI should not be curating work that's viewed by just a subject matter expert. It needs to be collaborative, dynamic. We want to avoid workflows where output's created and we just have a single person reviewing it. So strength in diverse perspectives, drawing in intersectionality and lived experiences provides collective insights that lead to stronger work. It's not about a single viewpoint, but collective insight. Okay, there are also the environmental impact. And I apologize as I talk about accessibility that this image here is a bit small. There's a QR code that you can use to access it to get a better view. But we have to address the environmental impact, sustainability as well. So this isn't limited to generative AI alone. We need to consider it more broadly with a range of technological and digital platforms. However, generative AI does have a significant environmental impact. It's very water intensive, with estimates suggesting that approximately half a liter may be required for every 5 to 50 prompts. And considering how generative AI is integrated into various platforms, search engines, where you automatically get queries generating AI responses, so what's the cumulative impact to the environment? The cost becomes substantial. So we need to consider all of these. And I also suspect that as these tools progress over time, they, I hope, become more efficient in how they're drawing on natural resources as well. So now I want to shift to some of the affordances. So what are things that we can do when using generative AI? Before jumping into the affordances of generative AI into creating open educational resources, it's important to foreground the values and principles of open educational practices, critical digital literacy, and transparency in how we use these tools. It's important that we keep these at the forefront so they can guide both our engagement with generative AI and our critical evaluation of its output to help us avoid some of the pitfalls. And some scholars are already talking about that oftentimes we talk about the issues, then we leap into just using it. So it's really important that we keep it front of mind as we're using it. Okay, so what are some of the ways that we can use this technology as well? So one of them is pathways to inclusive design with generative AI. I'm going to talk about accessibility here. So enhancing accessibility. This can be a valuable tool for enhancing accessibility. Can be used to generate alternative text, which I've used in this presentation. It can create transcripts for audio, simplify complex text, or present information in ways that resonate with your learners. It can support universal design for learning. You can put in prompts. How could I make this more accessible? So it can also help you think about ways that you can design your content to be more inclusive. With this, there's also the caveat, the risk of inaccessible output. I don't know how many of you have tried using it to maybe create a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes you'll notice it's overly crowded with content, right? So again, that's where you need the human to look over that and see. There are problems with it as well. I used it recently to create an infographic, but the color scheme was so difficult, it was problematic. So a few more prompts were needed. Okay, and the need for critical evaluation. I've highlighted how easily we can slip into practices that may inadvertently cause harm if we're not critically evaluating what is being produced. Resource development and generative AI. So in terms of scalability, so efficiency and resource management, it can help reduce demands on time, being able to produce outputs that may otherwise take a lot of time and resources that we don't always have available. Diverse content creation. It allows us another means to update, adapt, revise content from a previous OER, creating ancillary resources, translating text. I don't know if you've done that before. It's so time intensive, right? Or transcribing. I don't know if you remember the days back when we had to, listen and transcribe. Video creation, editing, creating visual aids. So there's so many ways that it can help and support us. So there's a lot that it can do, a lot of ways we can innovate with this technology. Justice. So this includes creating resources where none may have existed. It might be something as simple as creating images that are contextually relevant, where learners feel like they're being reflected in the content. It's also about getting social and epistemic justice as well, right? How are we getting different narratives, perspectives in there? How are we widening access to high quality resources? How are we able to get them in multiple formats that benefit our learners? Global accessibility. So it's assist with technical tasks, right? That we can format into Pressbook. Maybe that's something that would take a lot of time just to learn how to use it. This can help us with that. Help us using H5P. So keeping all of this in mind, I want us to think about what are some specific examples of ways that we can use this in the work that we're doing. Okay, so integrating generative AI into OER. So first, let's talk about some privacy settings you can activate. To deal with privacy concerns, as mentioned earlier, you can look at the privacy settings in generative AI tools that you're using. So for instance, if I'm going to refer to ChatGPT in this example. So under settings and data controls, you can stop the data from being used for training. You can disable chat history in training. And there's also a temporary chat mode. You can use temporary chat to ensure the conversation is never saved or used for training. You can manage the memory. You can either turn off this feature or delete specific memories. You can delete individual chats. Now, all of this kind of comes with a caveat too. So if you dig a little deeper, chats are saved to your account until you delete them manually. Okay, when you delete a chat or your account, the chat is removed from your account immediately. Sounds good. And scheduled for permanent deletion from OpenAI systems within 30 days, okay? So you may delete it, it's still in the system. And so, and there are some other caveats taken into consideration. The chat may already, if the chat has already been de-identified and disassociated from you, OpenAI might retain it for longer, or they might retain it longer for security or legal obligations. So I'm not sure how it determines those, right? So there is some gray area in terms of privacy. Once you delete a chat, you cannot recover it. So deleting a chat removes it both from your visible history and the system after the retention time, but then there are all those other caveats in there. Okay, so I want to also show you, and I don't know if you've played around with Google Notebook LM. It's a multimodal way of you can put in information and you can have it summarized. They're very different audio features. So just in case we had any technical difficulties, I've recorded a video, so I'm going to show this to you. I'm going to show you how Notebook LM can turn a single existing document into multiple presentation formats without recreating the content. This is one way that it can be helpful with creating or adapting an OER, for instance. If you're not familiar with Notebook, this is an AI-powered note-taking and research assistant from Google. It allows you to load documents in various formats and create a personalized AI that summarize it, answer questions, create study guides, and so forth. I've already gone in and uploaded a section on student motivation from an open source educational psychology textbook by Sifrit and Sutton. And instead of rewriting it, I'm going to use it to present the information in different ways. First, I'll show you. This is the information that I copied in. And what I did next is I asked it to summarize the text for 3 key points. And you can see this is below what it gave me. And what I like is it's only summarizing from the information I provided, and it provides these annotations here so you can see exactly where it's drawing the information from. Next, I wanted to turn the content into audio. So I went to Studio and I asked for an audio overview. You can determine if you want it long, detailed, or short. And I will just play a brief clip of what it created.
This is the brief on diverse student responses to scientific inquiry. You know, an elementary school bug assignment perfectly illustrates the massive difference between learning for passion versus learning for a grade.
I'm just going to stop it there, but you get a sense that it's summarizing the content in a way that's perhaps more interactive or provides another means to engage with the content. I then went to the studio again and I asked to create a slide deck. This is a slide deck that it created for me, and you can download it as PDF or PowerPoint. So you can also create prompts if you want to edit it within, or you can download it into a PowerPoint, then edit it further. And it didn't do a bad job with it. It actually created some engaging visuals to go with the slides. There's probably some editing that does need to be done, but overall, this is a good way to create ancillary resources for OERs. Okay, kind of just cut off there. But I just wanted to show you another way that you can use this. I like it because it's a closed system that they have. Also, I wanted to let you know that when I recorded the video, I put it into Descript. So that's a software editing program, also using generative AI in there. I think Audacity is another one that's openly available, but then I was able to edit the script, edit the video, and that's something that would have taken me a lot of time if I had done it, where I'm actually slicing the clip myself. So just showing you all the ways that we can use generative AI, how it helps. We're still creating the content, having that critical perspective, but it's helping us with the workflow in different ways. So a few things with Notebook LM, just to be aware of, is that it also has, so privacy features you're in charge of what's in there. If you share it with others, they have access. However, sometimes Google LM will look at the content to make sure that it's that it's safe and what you're putting in there. So again, there's that gray area with, is it fully private? So just to be aware of that, and always kind of look at those privacy statements when you're using different tools. So another one that I'm going to show you a few examples now as well. So this is a paper that introduces Sopala. It's a model for delivering high quality K-12 education using AI, open educational resources, and it's offline first technology, and it's designed for low resource and low internet environments. So again, addressing one of the concerns that I talked about, especially when it comes to the need for stable, high-speed internet connection. And what this shows, so Paula is showing that combining AI, open resources, and offline technology, it can create scalable, sustainable, and equitable educational systems, especially for regions where you have limited connectivity. This was used in Ghana for the first time, I believe, when it was first launched. It's available to being used and expanded to other African countries as well. And it shows how teachers can effectively use offline digital tools. It can help, AI is being used to help localize the content. So have it in the local languages, and oftentimes that was an issue to get educational materials. One of the things that I really like about this is they're using this tool to also help track students, but in the sense that they're seeing how well are they doing. Because a lot of students will leave school and they still can't read or write. So this is a way to say, okay, how is this particular student doing? What further supports do they need? So you're seeing the way that they're using this in different ways, how they're looking at how they're doing in order to offer more support. H5P. I don't know how many of you have tried H5P, but there's a bit of a learning curve in there. But H5P, I think, can do a lot of great things. It's very interactive, allows your learners another way to interact with materials. You can use AI to create H5P content. There's a lot of resources out there, videos. You can even go to the H5P website on how to use AI to create H5P content. So another great resource, another great way to use generative AI. And it really helps our learners. Like I mentioned, engaging content. You can have formative checks for learning, and so forth. So again, the links are here to look at this. Accessibility might not be as big as we need. When we're considering using AI to create ancillary materials, one major concern we need to be aware of is ensuring the validity and reliability of the AI-generated questions. So this is important, where we need to make sure we review and validate the content to ensure it's accurate, relevant, and also checking for biases. So this is just a little flow chart to think about the decisions that we make. We also need to think about privacy and data, right? Security is also a critical issue. AI systems often collect and analyze student performance, so if you're putting that back into the system, be aware. So we need to make sure we have robust security measures to ensure compliance with data protection, to safeguard our students' information and maintain trust as well, especially if you're putting it back into generative AI. Okay, I love this example. I think it's so innovative. I just feel so excited when I talk about it. And I got so excited when I was reading about this example. I think it really shows how you can be so innovative with generative AI. So this is an example from Dr. Breen, who created prompts that turn ChatGPT into a role-playing simulation set, and it's for a history course. So it's in a plague-era medieval world where each student plays a unique character, and they have to make 10 decisions that shape their survival and the story and how the story progresses. So what I love and what's so fascinating about this is, so students also submit the chat link, and they have to reflect and analyze what the AI got historically right or wrong. So this is where they're using the knowledge that they have, right? Putting it in and looking for the inaccuracies. So they then have to go and research, okay, were these inaccuracies? How can we get this right? And then they're putting it back into the system to help correct it. So it's got multiple steps in there. They're having metacognition. They need to use prior knowledge. It's not that it's being fed to them, but they're playing an active role in it. So this activity functions as an interactive case study. It's aligned with course goals, and it can be adapted to other situations. So I've provided a QR code for this because I think it's a really innovative way to use the technology to create that interactive feel. Sometimes we do this through virtual reality, but then the sustainability in updating it is another issue. Here's another way that you can do it that's sustainable. You can update it more often. I have some other activities that I also want us to look at. We may not have time right now, but we can return back to this as well. So the other thing that I wanted you to consider and to think about is creating and evaluating an OER using generative AI. This activity and the next one that I'm going to talk to you is from the Program for Open Scholarship and Education from the University of British Columbia. So what I'd encourage you to do, and it's really important to also use the tools, get a sense of what they're doing. How good are they with your subject matter expertise area? So just create a single page section for an open textbook in your field. Use a generative AI model. Select a topic of your expertise where you can assess the quality of the content. And then review the AI generated content for accuracy, clarity, bias, and completeness. And there are a lot of frameworks you can use as well that are out there to look for those critical aspects, that digital literacy. This is another one, just using AI to create alternative text for images, which I find really useful because this is something I'm not always the best at summarizing images, so I find this very helpful. Again, you still need to check it, and there are also guidelines on what can you do, what are different ways to look at these resources, check them. I also have some resources for you to look at. I've included that writing case study using generative AI. There's prompts and stuff that you can download to see how this works. Creative Commons licensing, to look at that. And there's also a framework for transparent generative AI use in higher education. So these are just a few of the different areas that you can explore further. And with that, I thank you very much for being here today and joining us. And I look forward to any questions that you may have, or we can maybe pop in and see how we can use some of these activities. And I'd love to hear how you're also using generative AI in your work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Surita. I think that's very informative and very useful for all of us and interesting as well. So I wonder whether there are any questions in the Zoom chat. Can you please check?
Yes.
We can first take them.
Sure.
And our audience here, the physical audience here, might also have some questions. So please be ready with your questions.
Okay, so the first question that we have here, when creating OER using generative AI, how can we ensure the content remains truly open and free from copyright or licensing issues? Fabulous question. So that's where, if you want it to remain free from copyright issues, it needs to be human generated, is essentially what it is. So that may be where you are, and there are different models that talk about the extent to which you use generative AI as well, which will be helpful. But really, if you're going to use it, it may be to create it in different ways. So it might be that you're working from an open source that's already out there. You want to specify it for your content. So you might be working with a team to edit that, and then maybe you're putting it in there. Maybe you want it to have audio to it. You want to create it in multiple means. So you could do it like that. But the key caveat there is it has to be generated by humans.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions, or shall we move on to
I
physical?
think that was there's one more. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. That was the only question in there.
Would you like to ask any questions?
While we're maybe thinking of questions, also I'd love to hear maybe ways that you're using generative AI to create OERs in innovative ways. It's always good to share those ideas.
Yeah, I think one of when you look at how the Gen AI is developing, and we look at the concept of OER.
Yes.
Now it says initially without Gen AI, OER is something developed by educators to teach or communicate with the audience. What about the possibilities of creating a system where
the student themselves developing their own OER through GenAI, other than, so if you can work out a workflow for that to make accuracy, I think it might have a different chapter of OERs.
Yes, and there have been situations, so when we look at open pedagogy, that's a lot of times where, and a lot of OERs too, is working with students and instructors collaboratively to create OERs, and encouraging also students to create those as well. So there's a lot on both ends with student-created, faculty and student-created OERs that are there. And I think, this can also perhaps provide a means where they can think about how can they add to those systems and create more information in there. I hope that answers, but I think, yeah, it's looking at new possibilities as well. And that's where I think there's a lot of ways we can innovate and emerge new ways of doing things that we maybe haven't considered.
Dr. Surita, regarding creating OER using AI, Gen AI, still there are people who are reluctant to use AI due to various reasons.
Yes.
But how would you promote to have a human touch also into the OER when you're using AI? Along with AI, whether we could have a human touch. How would you promote that?
Yeah, I think that's so important. So two kind of things there. I also understand that fear. When generative AI came out, was it in 2022? At first, I wanted nothing to do with it. I'll be completely transparent. I was like, oh, what is this? What's it taking from me? I was really concerned about privacy and surveillance. But also, we're in education. I can't not look at it, right, as a way to not what's coming up. Like, I can't dismiss it either, right? So that's where I started to use it. What does this do? I need to understand the tool. So I think it's really important to use it because we need to understand what it is, right? And we ourselves may have biases and assumptions, right? I know I have, and through using it, it's like, oh, okay, listening to others, how they're using it. It's really changed how I think about it. And with regards to your second question, I think there absolutely has to be a human element. Otherwise, it's just content curation, right? And then that's where we get into this really, really gray area about copyright. We're getting into all these potential violations that are happening in there. So there needs to be that collaborative element. There needs to be that human oversight into the ways that we're using it. I've seen generative AI used in great ways. Like there's that interactive case study example where they're looking at the mistakes. They're using metacognition to think about, okay, how could we improve it? That's another way you could think about UDL and accessibility. So we have this output, okay, what are ways we can do it? But I think we need humans to be the creators of a lot of the content that's going in there, and then think about, okay, what is it that generative AI can do that can help us improve it in certain ways? And I also think it's really important to go back to the principles and values of open education practices and see, okay, how are these in alignment with them? Because that also brings out the humanness as well. Okay, hope that helps answer. Sorry, sometimes I get so excited by your questions. I think I go off on tangents.
Yeah. Are there any other questions on Zoom?
Yes. If we use ChatGPT content and cite it properly, apply to our own work in the paper, then make use of humanized AI, is it acceptable for paper writing? Okay, so you have to be careful if you use ChatGPT content. Because of the issues with copyright, we don't know whose work has been scraped to generate that content. That's where the issue comes. So this goes back to how these systems were created. It was scraping information just from the internet, and they didn't have copyright access to that. So if they're using the content and then you're applying it to your own work, you need to be careful there, because that work then is not properly cited. And this is things that I've seen when I'm working with students, right? Sometimes they'll use it. It may be helpful, but I say, you know what, you've just plagiarized 5 scholars there. But that's where the expertise is needed, because they don't know that content. And that's something that I'll be like, okay, this is this person's work and this person's work. So you have to be careful there. If you use ChatGPT content and cite, okay, this is the same question. So yeah, you really need to be careful with copyright. And Creative Commons has a lot of great articles, because there are a lot of different sides to it that we need to consider when we're thinking about how we're using AI-generated content.
So with respect to using the generative AI. So according to the OER license, it has to be cited as CC by 0.
Yes. So when you're using it, there's a 0 that you can use. I think sometimes, like, say, if it's produced a video, depending on what it's produced, but I'd be very careful and cautious. You need to be transparent. If it's AI generated content, you can't actually put a copyright on it.
So that means even if I put it as CC by 0, CC 0,
C0.
it still doesn't get accepted as an OER attribution.
I believe I have to double check on that because it's created by that. So it's acknowledging where it's created. You're being transparent, but you can't have it as a OER, I believe. But Sharonika?
I was wondering, because CZ0 is like the public domain without without BY. So you
Yes.
don't need to attribute. I think still it's a gray area, I believe.
Yes.
There are, different articles, different opinions, and so on. I think we had a discussion about that as well.
We did.
But I think we found something saying that CZ0 is okay, I believe.
Yes.
Because it doesn't need attribution to be on the safe side.
Yes. So that's with, like, I think it was when we did videos and we were looking at in relation to pictures and videos that was created. But it is a gray area, so I'd really suggest, like, looking through there. And it's something that I keep referring back to because it's changing also. There's a lot of legal cases that are happening at the moment as well. So it's an area you need to continually keep on top of, continually seeing, like, where is the discussion going.
So one more, like, what about creating infographics or image generation from using, because obviously when we do it on our own, it obviously doesn't look as good as it is similar to the generation
Right.
part. But it's our content.
Your work.
Yes,
Yes.
it's our content, our knowledge, everything is ours.
Yes.
It's just that it's been depicted using a generative AI tool.
Right.
So in that particular case, is it possible for us to actually attribute it as an OER material, but at the same time it's actually been used by, now even if you use Canva or even if you use PowerPoint, again it's our content, but it's been modeled or depicted by using another tool. So during that particular scenario, is it possible for us to kind of say
I believe you are, but I'm just going to say to double check as well, because it's human created content. And then you're getting it to help, and then you'd put generated by, and there's ways that you can cite it. But yeah, but I'd always just double check, but I believe that's where it is. But yeah, we could have, like, a
Thank
really,
you.
like, a whole session just on licensing.
So I think we had a very productive webinar today with Dr. Surita. So I think we have to thank her very much on behalf of the Faculty of Education, and we are doing this at the Center for Educational Technology and Media, and on behalf of the on behalf of the Open University of Sri Lanka, we are so thankful for you for sharing your ideas, your examples, and viewpoints. So this is still a very, growing area, very rapidly.
It's growing very rapidly, and there are a lot of tensions, as you can see as well.
Yeah, so we don't know what we discussed today might be changed tomorrow, right? So anyway, so I think thank you so much, Sarita, once again, and it's a pleasure having you here today. And I would like to thank all the audience here, physical as well as Zoom participants. We had a good participation as well. Thank you very much for your participation and your questions. So we will be, this session is video recorded, so we will be uploading it into our SETME's Open Education YouTube channel. So it will be a good resource for anyone who are interested in this area. Thank you so much, everybody. And once again, thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone, for coming out today. Thank you.